Unlocked Treasures by Cathy Pennington. Childhood Memories of Growing Up in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky. Introduction. Sometimes just a certain smell or taste, or seeing someone I haven't seen in years, can unlock memories from days gone by. All those wonderful childhood memories that I now treasure so much come rushing back to me. I have so many memories, mostly from the 1960s, of growing up in the rugged Appalachian Mountains of southeastern Kentucky. The older I get, the more those memories mean to me. I am the daughter of Alvin Thomas and Gertie Mae Everidge Thomas of Knott County, Kentucky. I come from a large family of 4 brothers and 3 older sisters. Each of us differ in our own way. There were 8 of us in all. The firstborn, William Mitchell, was followed by Mary Jane, then Alfred Grayson, then Sharon Susan, then Zephyr Ann, then me, Cathy Lou, followed by Omega Dale, and the youngest, Jessie Jean. I was born on September 11th, 1957, at Mount Murray Hospital in Hazard, Kentucky. The hospital was located on High Street and operated by Catholic nuns. Mom told me that the nuns sprinkled me immediately after I was born, against her will while she was incapacitated. Now, most everyone knows that sprinkling is the Catholics' form of baptism, but my mom was the old regular Baptist faith, so that didn't go over very well with her. Even though I was born in Perry County, I grew up in neighboring Knott County, Kentucky. Memories of my mom and dad. When I think back on my childhood, so many thoughts and memories come rushing back to me. Most of my memories find me roaming barefoot through the creeks and hollows of Knott County, Kentucky. Of course, my parents make up a large part of my most cherished memories. I remember my mother hanging out clothes on the clothesline in the wintertime when it was so cold and snowy that by the time she finished, the clothes were frozen stiff as a board. Mom would often sing as she worked, "You gotta walk that lonesome valley, you gotta walk it by yourself. Nobody here can walk it for you, you gotta walk it by yourself." Daddy and Mommy always raised several gardens to supply our family with food. My sister Sharon said she recalled Daddy raising cushaws that vined from one side of the creek across to the other side, with great big cushaws hanging from the vines. Summertime memories include Mama and Daddy canning green beans in a tub in the yard and stringing beans to hang on the porch to dry, playing hopscotch and fighting with my sister Ann over which one of us got to draw the lines. Also, memories of older children in the hollow getting ready together to have a green plum fight. Gathering firewood was a year-round task, and I still remember my daddy hauling firewood off the mountain in an old wagon he had made just for that purpose. In my mind, I can see us children riding in that wagon on top of a load of firewood and the fun ride home. These are the true treasures of my childhood. The first cabin that Dad built. Several years before I was born, my father had built a 1-room log cabin about a quarter of a mile above the cabin that I grew up in on Dead Man's Branch in Knott County, Kentucky. Dad and Mom had 4 kids at that time: Mitchell, Murray, Alfred, and baby Sharon. Much like pioneer days, the 3 oldest kids slept in the loft of the cabin and had to climb up a ladder to their beds. The outhouse was a simple toilet constructed between 2 tulip poplar trees located around the hill a short distance from the house. I don't have any memories of the cabin because it was gone by the time I was old enough to remember. The cabin that I remember. But most of my earliest and fondest childhood memories come from events that occurred while our family was living in a different cabin. A 4-room log cabin my family owned, located just below the side of the first cabin my dad had built on Dead Man's Branch. Dead Man's Branch is a narrow holler located about 8 1/2 miles south of Heineman. the seat of Knott County. It was about 1.5 miles from the mouth of Deadman's Branch to our cabin at the head of the hollow. At first there was only a footpath up the hollow, but later a road was built. Our cabin sat on a mountainside, and the property was deeded to my mother, Gertie Mae Thomas, on August the 3rd, 1964 by her parents, William and Nanny Everidge. For several years we had no electricity in the cabin, and our only lights were kerosene and carbide lamps. Mom cooked our meals on an old coal and wood stove, and to this day that was some of the best tasting food I have ever eaten. The stove had a water reservoir on the side to keep dishwater hot, and the heat kept the kitchen cozy and warm during the cold winter months. At first we didn't really have much of a front yard because the cabin was built on a hillside, so Daddy had to dig one out. He dug and dug, working his way through roots and rocks trying to get the yard fairly level. Finally the job was finished, and Dad had even made a pretty rock wall around the yard and planted a few trees to provide shade from the hot sun in the summertime. I remember playing there many times. Being the youngest of 4 girls in the family, I relied a lot on my older sisters growing up, and to this day I would not be who I am if it wasn't for them. One of my earliest memories is of my oldest sister, Mary Jane, standing me up in a chair so I could reach the kitchen sink. I was determined to help wash dishes. Mary Jane was the oldest of my sisters and was like a second mother to me. As a young kid, I loved watching Mary Jane and Sharon wash the dishes, so I kept begging them to help. My, how things have changed. Without a doubt, washing dishes is now one of my least favorite things to do. We had no running water in the cabin, so when it came time to take a bath, the water had to be drawn from the hand-dug well. I will never forget the tub we bathed in. It was a big metal tub that was shaped like a giant peanut. The oldest sibling bathed first, then the next to oldest, and so on, until all of us had taken a bath. By the time my turn came, the water was cold, thick, and soapy with a bluish-gray tinge to it. It really didn't look very inviting and felt like I was bathing in everyone else's grime. Sometimes life just isn't fair. When springtime came to the mountains and wildflowers began to be springing up, my mom would make her usual trip up the hollow to Pop and Ma's old place to pick wild greens from the field where her parents used to tend a garden. Mom would return home with these wild greens she called Shawnee and Spickledock, among others. After cleaning the greens, Mom would pour bacon grease over them. This was her wild spring salad. The firecracker incident. At Christmas time one year, actually it was the night before Christmas, at the old cabin on Deadman's Branch, my brother Alfred found a firecracker lying in the snow. Well, he didn't actually know that it was a firecracker because he had never seen one before. Alfred brought the wet firecracker inside the house and laid it on the cook stove where Mommy had been cooking supper to dry it. The family was seated at the table eating supper when all of a sudden a loud bang rang out. The firecracker on the stove had exploded. The blast was so loud that it sounded like a shotgun blast. Daddy, not knowing what had happened, jumped up from the table, grabbed his shotgun, and ran outside, thinking it was a problem neighbor who had been known to cause trouble, shooting at our house. Daddy began cursing and calling that man every name in the book. Eventually, Daddy began to realize that no one was shooting at the house. What happened to the apple trees? Not long ago, my sister Mary Jane and I were talking about the delicious apples that used to grow around the area where we grew up. We wondered what happened to all those apple trees. Near the water well at our cabin on Deadman's Branch stood a big sweet apple tree. We kids couldn't wait for the apples to get ripe and fall off, so we would sneak and throw rocks and knock them off. and oh, were they sere. There was also a huge horse-apple tree down over the bank just below the garden, and those apples were my favorites, the best tasting apples ever. There was also Rome Beauty and winesap apples too, and I don't like sweet gravy. I remember my siblings and I walking out of Deadman's Branch to catch the school bus. Sometimes we would stop at a neighbor's house to wait for their kids to get ready so they could walk with us. They usually would be eating breakfast when we arrived, and their mom would insist that we eat with them. She only had to ask once because the smell of hot biscuits and gravy made us hungry, and this lady was a great cook. But I recall one morning things didn't go as expected. As I took a bite of the usually delicious tasting country gravy, I was in for a shock. The gravy tasted as sweet as dessert. Without thinking, I said, "I don't like sweet gravy." At first, the lady didn't know what I was talking about until she tasted the gravy for herself and then realized her mistake. She began laughing and explained to us what had happened. Somehow, she had gotten the salt and sugar mixed up. One day, we moved down the hollow below these neighbors. One morning when I woke up, I went out on the front porch and looked up the hollow. There was smoke boiling up from their house. Their house was on fire and burning. Everyone came running out to see what was going on. My dad and Mom ran up there to try to help put it out, but it was too late. The whole house was engulfed in flames. Thankfully, there was a house up the hollow a little ways that they moved into.